just started. If we're going to talk about the Compton Police Department, I'm not going to say anything more, but I'm going to advise you to look up the enforcers within the Compton Police Department. And for those who know what I'm talking about, then I have to say no more. But for those who don't know, hop on Google and do some research. The Compton Sheriff Department, the enforcers. And then once you kind of do some research on that, follow back up with me and we could discuss this a little bit further. But that adds a further layer of context to the way that we view this circumstance. Does anyone else want to make a comment on any of the two current events that we've mentioned, or the juxtaposition between the two?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, it's just mind-blowing how media and like this system, these, you know, cops, it's all just to protect white fragility. You know, the media coverage, the words they use, it's all just to protect that. You know, and it's just, I don't know how to form my words right now, but that's basically what I wanted to say.
I wanted to talk about how, sorry, my camera's not on, but I wanted to talk about, I think it's also interesting, like the amount of hypocrisy that comes from people who are pro-gun in this situation, because they're always like, oh, we need our guns to be able to defend ourselves if the government ever wants to come and, you know, because of that was how our country started, was we needed to defend ourselves against the government. But the second that a Black person uses a gun to defend themselves against the government, they're not defending themselves, they're violent, and they deserve to die, which is incredibly insane, the like dehumanization that of Black people that you need to have in order to like be able to form that kind of hypocrisy.
Yeah. Brett, you was gonna say something? Go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, actually, it's two things. Like I've been thinking, if cops are supposed to uphold the law, at what point do they? I mean, not at what point. If they're supposed to uphold the law, then how is it that they end up taking the law into their own hands? And another thing is I really think everyone. I'm critical of everything. So I believe that a lot of people are oblivious in the United States and across the world, because if the police are willing to kill someone, and I'm going back to George Floyd on camera, what else are they willing to do to anybody else?
And again, you know, I just like to overemphasize, although it's framed in a race issue in the Black-white binary, it's so much deeper than that. Because again, in Portland, the police is run up on white women. Like, it's not even a race issue at that point, right? So it's really a question of justice and injustice, right and wrong, you know what I mean? And that's really what it comes down to at the bare minimum. The way that they cloak it in race is almost a distraction, right? Because at the end of the day, you know what's right and you know what's wrong. You know what's just, you know what's unjust. It doesn't matter what body the individual occupies, right is right and wrong is wrong, right? And we use these signifiers, these archetypes to try to make sense of the world, but it limits us and it traps us in ignorance, right? And it prevents us from just seeing humanity as it is, right? At the end of the day, from my vantage point, we're all spiritual beings having a human experience, right? So from that level, it's really not even about your flesh, right? That's just the conduits that allows you to move through this world and through this realm. It's about the spirit that occupies this flesh, right? So once we start floating at that level, it just opens the doors to where things could be viewed from a different capacity, right? But you know, shit, we got to change these things, man. And I still remain radically optimistic in what's going on, because having conversations with like these with people like yourselves, it gives me hope. You know what I mean? Because a lot of people are tired of the status quo, and I believe down in my soul that there's more people who are tired of the status quo than the people who want to maintain the status quo. And at the end of the day, the people who seek to maintain the status quo, they're old and they're dying. Like let's just call it what it is, right? This is antiquated thought, right? And through time, the universe is going to wipe them out. But what's important is the people that come to fill these spaces and fill these seats, they're not reproducing the same ideas as the people who vacated those seats, right? And to me, that's where it becomes important. So last call, if you want to say anything else about this subject matter. If not, we'll jump into some Fanon. All right. So a little bit about Frantz Fanon himself, so that way we kind of know who we're dealing with before we jump into what he's doing. So Frantz Fanon is a Martinican. So we read Aimé Césaire last week. He's also from Martinique. Fanon, it was an understudy of Aimé Césaire, right? So a lot of the work that Aimé Césaire produced, Fanon research picked up on and was trained under his wing, right? So they're both coming from Martinique, which is a French colony. But what Fanon was able to do was he was able to go to France to study psychiatry, and he started to do psychoanalytical studies. And then through his psychoanalytical studies in France, he produced his first book, which was actually his failed doctor's dissertation, Black Skin, White Mass. So he submitted this for his doctor's dissertation. They rejected it. This book, Black Skin, White Mass, is a psychoanalytic on the affect of colonialism on both the Black body and the white body. So how colonialism affects the psychology of both the Black man and the white man. And I say man intentionally because the way that they speak when they say men, they're talking about men and women, but they only use men, right? So that's his first work. And I think his subsequent work was towards the African Revolution, but what we read was the book, A Dying Colonialism. So what's important in the genealogy of Fanon is while being a psychiatrist in France, he realized the ills of the colonial state, right? So he's psychoanalyzing the men who engage in torture methods against the Algerians, right? Men who are bombing and going to war with the Algerians. And then also he's able to psychoanalyze the Algerians themselves, right? So through this work, he sees just the atrocities of this colonial system, which causes him to defect from France and pick up armed struggles with the Algerians. So he literally engaged in revolutionary struggle with the Algerian people. Through that process, he starts to produce works like A Dying Colonialism, toward the African Revolution, and then one of his, like what they may call his opus, The Wretched of the Earth. So that's got a little bit of a background about Fanon. I believe he was born in 1925, made his transition in 1976. So some of the things that I'm kind of interested in the actual text that we read, one, I'm always interested in the question of, what's his thesis? What's the project that he seeks to engage, and what's the project that he seeks to engage his readers in, right? Taking two things into consideration, the title of the book, A Dying Colonialism, and then the title of the chapter, The Voice of Algeria, right? So one, I'm very attentive to this idea of a voice, right? So how does he articulate the voice? What does the voice mean? What does the voice mean for the Algerians? What does the voice mean for the French colonial occupiers, right? And then from the space of this class, how does that voice get morphed into the production of your guys' work, right? How do you guys, utilize your voice, discover your voice, and implement that into the work that you guys seek to produce, right? So this idea of voice. The importance, well, one, before I go there, the Algerian stance on the radio, right? So there's a shift that takes place in the way that the Algerians view the radio at the beginning of the chapter, and then the way that they view the radio towards the end of the chapter, right? So I'm interested in the initial way that the Algerians view the radio. And this is tied to this notion of the family structure, right? So I'm very interested in the Algerian family structure. And then within that, on the flip side of that inquiry, what, one second. So how did the Europeans relate to the radio, right? So what did having the radio mean for the Europeans? And he talks about that separately in the first half of the chapter than he does in the second half of the chapter. So also, I'm attentive to his movements as a writer, right? So again, one of those movements is how the Algerians initially viewed the radio, then he switches to how the Algerians view the radio as it pertains to their revolutionary activity towards the end of the chapter. So that's a move that Fanon does. So I'm interested in those movements. This idea, as the radio begins to get popular within the Algerian community, the Europeans saying, well, we're gonna put an Algerian at the kiosk to sell those radios, right? So to me, that's something of interest as well. And then he mentions the way that the occupiers responded to the revolution gave the Algerians some insight to the effectiveness of their revolution. So to me, that was something like, to kind of think about, right? And then again, back to this notion of a voice, the need for the Algerians to have an alternative news outlet, right? That kind of counters with the European and the French news was pumping out. So within that is this question of truth, right? So how do you situate truth? Whose truth are you going to, believe? The truth that's coming from the colonizing European radio stations, or the truth that's produced from the voice of Algiers, right? I'm also interested in the way that the Algerians were able to evolve their technology, right? So as the voice of Algeria gets more popular and more popular, they begin to try to circumvent that radio feed from going out. So the Algerians had to get creative in the way that they are able for the voice of Algiers to still be produced, right? So I'm interested in the way that they're able to engage technology. Also, the notion of the Algerian imagination, right? So again, how the French try to circumvent that radio feed, and it would be, he mentions how they would sit there and they would listen to the radio, and at certain times they would cut out and they would listen to the static, and they'll only hear a little bit, but they'll take that little bit and then imagine the rest to fill in those blanks, right? So the imagination of the Algerian people. You know what, let's see. And then my last thing is just this culture of struggle, the culture of the revolution. Is talked about, but it's implicit, but he deals with this at a very high level, right? How the culture of the movement, how the culture of the revolution begin to infuse the whole Algerian society, and then really the whole Arab world, right? And he starts to mention how, in Egypt and all across the Arab world, they were starting to get in tune to this idea of revolution. So I'm also interested in the culture of revolution. So those are my points of interest. Again, we don't have to use those for the fishbowl. You guys could discuss whatever you like. Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll jump into our fishbowl now. We'll have 4 participants. Is there anyone who wants to volunteer to fishbowl? Okay, so we got Tori. And then Tori, you're done for the semester for the fishbowl. So I'm gonna call names at random. If I called you already, just let me know that you already went. If you passed already, you cannot pass any longer. And then we just need 3 more people. Again, you could talk about some of the things that I found of interest, or just whatever you found of interest. Once each individual goes who have been assigned to fishbowl, we'll open up the fishbowl conversation to the larger group. Depending on time, we may go into breakout groups. If not, we'll just call it a day. Carla Galvez.
Yeah, I already went.
You already went? Okay, thank you. Kenny, have you fishbowled already?
If I could use my skip this week.
Okay.
Thanks.
Let me write that down. Lilia, have you fishbowled already?
No, I haven't. I'll do it.
Okay, thank you, Lilia. Leonardo, have you fishbowled? Are you, one, does your mic work to fishbowl? And if so, are you prepared to fishbowl? We'll give you a second. So while you get connected, man, I'm gonna see if you get somebody else. Okay. Sebastian, have you fishbowled already?
I have not.
Are you prepared to fishbowl?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot, yeah.
And then you're also done for the semester, sir.
Sounds good.
Leonardo, did you get connected yet?
Yeah, I think so. Hello, is my mic working?
Yeah, you're good, man. Are you prepared to fishbowl today?
Yeah.
Okay, so our four will be Sebastian, Leonardo, Lilia, and Tori. So I'll leave it to you guys. And once those four went, we'll open the conversation up to the broader group. Last point, you guys, if there's a particular point in the text that you want to kind of have us pay attention to, please provide the page number. That way we could all get on the same page.
Wait, Professor, I got a question real quick.
Yeah, what's up?
I think I'm out the loop. Did we have to purchase this book or did you send it to us?
It should all be on the Canvas. It's no, not the Canvas, excuse me, the Google Classroom. It should all the readings for the entire semester are all on the Google Classroom doc. So you won't have to purchase any books.
Where is this reading though?
Let me pull up my
my fault. I'm like, wait, I gotta be in my fault. I gotta be like, you know.
Yeah, give me 1 second. I'm gonna pull it up.
Tripping. What the fuck?
I'm gonna share my screen and I'll show you where to locate that.
All right.
So this is the Google Classroom site.
Okay, I got that.
And then would I go to classwork?
Okay.
And then, so right now, this one is Fanon, A Dying Colonialism.
Okay.
And then that's the PDF there.
Okay.
And then next week's reading will be Glissant, Poetics of Relation.
Okay.
Actually, no, I'm sorry. Next week we're watching a film. Next week we're watching Battle of Algiers, so there is no reading. But after the Battle of Algiers, it's Glissant, Poetics of Relation.
You can mark me in then for that one. I got that.
Okay, cool.
Right.
So I'm gonna close out my screen and then we'll jump back to the fishbowl.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
No worries, man.
I guess I'll get started. There was a point that you mentioned, Professor. It was that the Algerians the French would cut out the Algerians' radio, so people really couldn't listen to it. And I like to connect that to sometimes like the modern world. And I'm wondering if that happens now. It's kind of like super broad, but I wonder if I guess the majority kind of cuts out the minority's voice, especially in media. I feel like it's changing in a bit, that minority's getting a little bit more of the voice. But, you know, I guess if they are cutting out the voice, then we will never really know. But I just thought that was interesting that, you know, the French would cut out the Algerians' media. And that's still something that we deal with a little bit today.
If I can interject, if you guys don't mind, because Sebastian, he brings up a good point. And when I read this, what was it, last fall for my seminar for my Ph.D., I thought the same thing. It was like, okay, so what forms of censorship play out in the contemporary, right? And I think where we see that most largely is in social media, right? So the way that things move now, Twitter is a very strong organizing tactic and organizing tool. A lot of information is disseminated through like sites like Instagram. Personal example, I am not a member of the Nation of Islam, but I follow a lot of the Nation of Islam's Instagram accounts, right? So there's one brother on there, his name is Riza Islam. He has really been blackballed off of Instagram, right? Another individual from the Nation of Islam who has been blackballed off of YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter is the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, right? So he cannot even get any type of address on any type of social media outlet. He's charged with being anti-Semitic. And to me, that's debatable, but that's another conversation. But when you talk about censorship of the oppressed communities, those are examples of that censorship, right? For a vast majority of us, especially for the younger generation, we're not going to ABC, we're not going to CNN to get our news. I go to Twitter, right? I'm gonna go see what's trending right now, because at least we could get on the ground information, right? And oftentimes, I'm privy to information before the news outlet either reports it or they get it, because you get the information firsthand, right? So in the modern world, we can look at the verse of Algiers being really fashioned into Twitter, right? And depending on what Twitter outlets you follow, you kind of get firsthand accounts of what's happening in movement spaces before it goes to the mainstream channels. So one, it's a great analysis, Sebastian, and that's a great way to tie what you read to modern times, right? So that's scholarly work, and that's a posing scholarly question.
Yeah, going back to what Sebastian said, I also found it interesting, like how French authorities prohibited the sale of radio sets. Like, I think I connected that to how it's taking place in modern days, like, but in a way of blocking people from accessing to certain types of images or like information. For example, like the media or education system refused to show us how many Vietnamese died during the Vietnamese War, and instead they like tend to focus on how many Americans died. I'm not sure that's like directly connects to it, but also like it's my personal like opinion. But when I was seeing news of Black Lives Matter protest in Japan, I felt that I saw more news of like the conflict between the police and protesters during the protest, rather than like depiction of protest as peaceful movement. And also like I saw more of like looting or like more like violent stuff that was happening during Black Lives Matter, caused by like it's not caused by all of the people who participated in the protest, but I felt like the media is trying to portray the protest as more like violent stuff. And I think that relates to what Fanon was saying, because the authorities were trying to keep the like certain images of like I'm not sure how to put in words, but I feel like the authorities were trying to keep the image of like white people or police as good and protest as negative, kind of. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how I connected the like French prohibiting the sale of radio sets to like how like certain information is blocked by a certain group of people for like unjust reasons.
And I think too, to your point, Lilia, like on a global scale, right? So like these images are being, you said, all the way in Japan, right? So that's going to shape the whole way that the Japanese look at Black Lives Matter protests and look at the whole movement for Black Lives Matter is going to be shaped by the way that the media portrays these images, right? And this is at a global capacity. Very good point.
Yeah, I have two points, but I'll share the one that's related to what Lilia had just said, and Sebastian. Because at a point in the reading, it said that if they're gonna filter the news, then all the Algerians will create their own. They're gonna form their own, and I think that kind of relates to today, where we have social media, and I feel like during these protests and during these times, like we've kind of created a network where we share like what's going on. We have phones, so we're actually filming what's going on instead of like just taking what the news is saying. But then they go ahead and want to censor all the stuff that like our news, I mean, I'm not really involved in TikTok, but I'm sure like with TikTok, you see like, all like people will share what's going on, and then they'll censor that too nowadays. But also with there's a point on page 74 where it says radio it's Radio Alger is defined as Frenchmen speaking to Frenchmen, which like that proves right away, like it's not a radio for the Algerians at all. And that kind of brought me back to our last class with thingification, where it's kind of like, I don't know if this is considered yeah, it would be appropriation, kind of, where they're like, we'll have our presence there, we'll want your culture, but we won't want to be you, and that's what I was thinking reading that, and yeah.
I have a quick comment, just real quick.
Yeah.
Kind of about just censoring people. This might sound a little off, but I feel that companies shouldn't be too fast to ban someone for making like an uncomfortable conversation. I feel uncomfortable conversations are what lead to progress. So just instantly banning them, I don't think is the best tactic to take. So yeah, just wanted to say that.
I agree, Sebastian. So like over the summer, and really still now, I've been doing like a lot of like DEI work, diversity, equity, and inclusion work for companies like Apple. There's a company called Samsara. And it's funny because like to really do this at any type of effective capacity, it has to be uncomfortable, right? There's no way to talk about what's going on in the world today in the corporate setting and not be uncomfortable, right? So to Sebastian's point, and when I'm doing that work in those spaces, one of my first comments is like, well, how comfortable is your company with being uncomfortable? Because if y'all ain't trying to be uncomfortable, then don't even fucking bring me in here because you're wasting my time. You know what I mean? So if you really want to get to the crux of what's going on, somebody's going to feel upset. Somebody's going to feel some kind of way. That's just the way that it has to be. And due to the fact that we're always trying to be comfortable, we remain in the status quo, right? And they say the fastest way to achieve progress is to get uncomfortable. You know what I'm saying? Like even in your personal life, if you want to change something in your personal life, make whatever it is that you want to change as uncomfortable as possible. And you're going to find a way to get to that goal, right? So I think you're spot on with that, Sebastian.
Agreed.
Leonardo, we haven't heard from you yet.
Okay. Well, I wanted to say, as I was reading the story or chapter or whatever, I really admired the Algerians' tenacity to the point where, as the story went on, they were sort of making the French look like, I don't know, like the stereotypical Saturday morning villain with like twirling mustache and all that. just because of the tenacity, because the French were like, okay, we're not selling you newspapers. Well, we'll get the kids to give us newspapers. We're going to take away newspapers. We'll use the radio. And then that tricked them for a couple months. Then they realized, oh, shit, this is actually bad.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just really admired the Algerians' tenacity. And the story also made me think how important paying attention to censorship is, because personally what I focused on was when they started jamming the voice of Algeria, because it really very much relates to today, even though obviously we don't use radios. Because while yes, our communication technology has gotten more powerful over the years, so has censorship. And I feel like at some points it's getting to the points where censorship is really scary, just because it's getting less and less transparent, because now it's all based around, you know, algorithms and just things people who aren't specially inclined naturally can't see. Like, for example, with Twitter, with the whole trending system that they have and all that. And then I don't know how related this is, but just yesterday I was recently seeing that Twitter was banning certain people because their algorithm was thinking that they were bots for Brendan Taylor. I don't know, something about bots just spamming justice for Brendan Taylor or something. And some people who had no involvement with it just got banned out of nowhere and lost all of their followers and the people they followed.
Yeah, and I think one of your points, Leonardo, just as far as the tenacity of the Algerian people, right? And that goes to the point that I kind of closed out my portion with, is just the culture and the spirit of revolution, right? So it was a galvanizing spirit that kind of took place, the whole family. So, and to me, this goes into the move of the way that the Algerians view the radio, right? So initially, they're not rocking with the radio because they may hear some things that will be offensive to their family cohesiveness and to their family structure, right? But as things progress, the whole family would sit around the radio and listen. And, you know, or if it got late, they would assign one person to listen. And if they heard any a little bit of a semblance of something, then that one person would be assigned to go tell the rest of the family what they heard or what they thought they heard, right? So this galvanizing notion of what the Algerians were really on as it pertains to this revolutionary spirit, right? It caused them to be more technologically inclined, right? So we don't have electricity, let's get some batteries, right? Okay, so they took away the batteries, we're gonna find another way to get these signals to be reproduced, right? They took that away, then we just gonna make up what we heard on the radio and just spread that around, right? And to me, what was interesting, the fabulation, right? The made up stories had more weight and had more power and had more validity than what they actually heard or saw, what they heard on the radio, right? So to me, it's something to think about as it pertains to this revolutionary culture. And then when you talk about being an agent of change, right? When you talk about changing something that seems unchangeable, we have to look at circumstances like this to find inspiration, right? So what is it that caused the Algerians to uproot the colonial system, right? What phenomenon took place? What shifts that took place? What was their revolutionary culture and spirit that allowed them to maintain that struggle for the years that they had to maintain that? Because let's be real, man, if you study revolution, that is nothing romantic, is nothing simple, nothing about that. It's difficult, right? People are losing their lives. You're sleeping in trenches, right? So this is all that comes along with revolutionary activity. And for some people to maintain that for 5 years plus, there's something to be said, right? So Leonardo's point brought me back to the point of this revolutionary culture that we've seen in the Algerian people. So thank you guys for the fishbowl. Everyone did a really good job. But at this point, we'll open up to the class conversation so everyone can participate. What are some of your thoughts about the reading? You find it difficult? You found it interesting? Just anything?
There a part of the reading that was really interesting to me was like the power of fear and the way that the reading kind of highlights how colonial power is like weak and is always scared of falling apart. And so just the mere idea of like Algerians running around making it seem like a revolution is coming was scaring the colonizers, and understanding that like all that takes is everyone to like just band together and threaten a revolution for colonizers to be scared of what they've upheld to fall apart. So it just really highlighted how like colonialism is really reliant on being constantly perpetuated, or else it risks being fallen apart. And we live in a place, and I think the reading said something where like we live within colonialism in a way that we can assume comfort. And earlier guys were talking about uncomfortable conversations and how it's important to have those to break the comfort of living in this colonial state and understanding that like this isn't perfect and it's not good for anyone really.
Yeah, Golden, you bring up a good point. Like this reading, it really humanizes this institution of colonialism, right? So even when we think about racism in this country, it's something that cannot be overcome. It's something that we can't see ourselves being without, right? Like I don't even see that being a reality, as optimistic as I am. But in order to make that more of a reality, we have to knock down the fallacy that the people who uphold these systems of racism cannot be overcome or cannot be beaten, right? It's like the notion of seeing God bleed, right? So once you see God bleed, it's like, oh shit, God is human, right? So then you can start getting chopped at God if you so choose to, right? And this is what Golden is talking about in the way that Fanon wrote this, right? So when we talk about method, one of his methodological moves was to make the system of colonial be human, right? Make it seem like it could bleed, make it seem like it could be defeated, and make it seem like it could be overcome, right? By the most futile circumstances. Like Golden said, the dude just running around the street, down the street fanatically saying, we won, we won, we won. It sent the French up in arms. They had to check and see, yo, what happened at the Capitol? Is the flag still up, right? So as something as neurotic as that sent them into a frenzy, right? And we see that play out at certain levels here. I mean, you guys spoke to the contradictions that this state operates under, right? The right to bear arms, but not if you Black, right? So these kind of contradictions speak to the humanism of this system of oppression that we are occupying. So that's a very good point, both. Who else? Actually, real quick, I'm gonna read that portion that Golden was mentioning. It's on the bottom of page 78. Individuals in afraid of aberration would lose control of themselves. They would be seen dashing down a street or into an isolated farm, unarmed, or waving a miserable jagged knife, shouting, "Long live independent Algeria, we've won." This aggressive kind of behavior, which assumed violent forms, would usually end in a burst of machine gun bullets, fired by a patrol. When a doctor was able to exchange words with one of these dying men, the usual kind of expression he heard would be something like, "Don't believe them. We've got the upper hand. We got the upper edge. Our men are coming. I've been sent to tell you they're coming. We're powerful and we shall smash the enemy." So mind you, that's what's said on his deathbed, right? So he run out down the street saying, "Long live the revolution." They shoot his ass up. And if he don't die and he's on the deathbed talking to the doctor, what he tells the doctor is, "Don't worry, we won. And I've been sent here to tell you that more of the men are coming," right? So again, this revolutionary spirit, even when he's dying, his last words is, "We will smash the enemy." That's profound. That's tremendously profound. What are some other thoughts?
Kind of adding on to how, like this system of colonialism and how like the whole system is kind of perpetuated in fear and it's fear-based. Like kind of further on, they talk about how, well, like kind of we just said that they straight up shot. All he was doing was running around, making proclamations, and they straight up shoot him. Where is it? Further on that page, in the dominant group, likewise, there were cases of mental hysteria. People would be seized with a collective fear and panicky settlers were seen to seek an outlet in criminal acts. And it just, again, kind of like how we're sort of relating it to what's going on today. You kind of see that with the protests with Breonna Taylor. Like you saw, there was a video going around of protesters. They had a U-Haul and they were getting out their signs. Did you see that? And I literally saw a right-wing thing that one of my mutuals had shared making fun of on Twitter. It was like Breitbart or something, was like, left-wing protesters are bringing out metal shields to smash and you could literally see like the canvas like rippling. And then later on in my feed, I found a video from an actual protester who was there and be like, yeah, you know, they say that we're, you know, we have these signs and stuff, we're declaring like a revolution, kind of like how the Algerians were in a way. And then they've turned the camera around and it's a bunch of like right-wing militias with their guns out and all that stuff. And it just kind of like going back to what I think Golden was saying, is that like how it's really based in fear, and how like, yeah, these settlers, they hear this talk of like, wait, revolution, what, like, oh my God, guys, are we still number one? Like, what's going on? And again, like, it just sort of made me like, oh wow, we see that, you know, today. And I actually enjoyed the reading. I liked seeing, it was really interesting to me to see the consumption of radio in a different part of the world, because of course all we hear about is USA. Right. Whereas here, you know, it's because I just took like a history of television class, and we kind of touched on the radio and how like the radio in the States, it was seen as like, oh, this is great. Like, this is a way to communicate with each other. This is like a great entertainment source, news source. But the Algerians were like, no, this is more colonialism, you know, this is more. And then to kind of see how they, in a way, kind of use the settlers' tools in kind of a way, you know, because they kind of made that radio work for them with the pirate radio and all that. And that was just, I don't know, that was just kind of really interesting to see that juxtaposition, like, oh wow, like they were kind of very hesitant about this technology, and then they actually had to use it for like a real purpose. Like we got to, you know, the US here, we were kind of spoiled. We got to use it for entertainment programs and stuff like that. They were using it to literally fight for their lives. And that was like, I don't know, that was just really cool to read about, really fascinating.
Yeah, that brings up a couple of points for me, Crystal. One, as it pertains to what you're mentioning in the evolution of technology and how it's being viewed and used. I think about 92, I believe it was, and correct me, Brett, if I'm wrong, the Rodney King situation, how 92, okay. So how it was captured on film, right? And how important that was and what that led to. And then we fast forward to today, and the ability to capture these things on camera leads to the same type of results, right? So you see how technology can play an important role in the way that we view activism and social justice. And then two, from a reading standpoint of just reading the writing of the book, or the chapter, excuse me. I don't know if you guys picked up, but it's broken into 3 sections, if you kind of peek, right? The first section is like how the Europeans view the radio, what it meant for them, how it symbolizes their Europeanism. They can still hear French, even though they're in the Algerian colony, things of that nature. How the Algerians took a disavow to the radio. They didn't want to be infused with the French culture, so they was like, I'm good, right? So that's like the first part of the chapter. Then it kind of he does his move to where how it flips, and now the Algerians are using the radio for their interests, and it's kind of putting the French on the run, and they're trying to come up with ways to circumvent the way that the Algerians are using the radio, right? So that's the second move of the text. And then the final move is he goes into, because remember what I said Fanon is, he's a psychiatrist, right? So if you pay attention to the final pages of the chapter, there is psychoanalytical. He's doing a diagnosis of the situation, right? Even look at the terminology being used. It's psychoanalytic terminology. So those are kind of like the 3-part that he breaks up this reading into, you know, and if you kind of pay it, and that's why I said that movement of his writing becomes important, because you see that he's really dealing with a multiplicity of things that he condenses into one chapter. And to me, it's done very well. I'm always kind of torn when it comes to Fanon in his writing style, because when his first book, I can't stand this shit. I don't like the way it's written. I don't like what he's up to. I cannot fuck with it. But when he gets into like these, when he gets into the Toward the African Revolution, and when you get into Wretched of the Earth, you kind of see this side of Fanon that everyone celebrates him for. I liken him to W.E.B. Du Bois, right? And if anybody's familiar with Du Bois, he has this notion of, he starts off with the talented 10th, right? So the way that he seeks to promote social uplift for Black people is we're going to get 10% of the most talented of the Black population, educate them, train them, put them in positions of social uplift, and then that will allow for the rest of the 90% to come along as well, right? Very elitist in his perception and the way that we can socially advance, right? From a temporal standpoint, when he was dealing with this talented 10th, his ideological rival was Booker T. Washington. And Booker T. Washington's program was pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, we're gonna work in the fields, and we're gonna get our way up the social ladder by work, right? We're gonna work our way to that. And the boys like, hold on to that. We did enough work, homie. We've been in these fields for centuries. Like, fuck all that. We're just trying to build up our intellectual acumen, right? Hence the talented 10. But if you watch the boys evolve, he ends his life in Ghana writing the Encyclopedia Africana, right? And he ends his life as a Pan-Africanist. And his goal is to unify and liberate all of African people under a scientific socialist platform, right? So we go from, we're gonna only take the elite to now we're organizing the masses. So you see his ideological evolution over the course of his academic career, right? And the same is kind of at play with Fanon, right? Because in Black Skin, White Mask, his project is this idea of a new humanism, right? And he says that both Blacks and whites are trapped in this narcissism that keeps them from seeing each other as human, right? So the whites are trapped in their narcissism of superiority. The Blacks are trapped in their narcissism of inferiority. And because of these neurotic ideals, we can't be viewed as human. Then he makes claims as for Black folks to become human, that path is going through whiteness, right? I'm like, well, what the fuck are you talking about? But this is his argument. So he's saying because of this, Black people have become alienated, right? So the way for us to get over our alienation is to disalienate, right? So this is his project in Black Skin, White Mask. And again, so at the time, he's a psychologist in the French system, but he defects from that. And he starts to get into armed revolutionary struggles on the side of the Algerians. And then he produces Towards the African Revolution, right? And then from there, he goes into A Dying Colonialism and finishing with The Wretched of the Earth. So again, the ideological progression of these individuals, W.E.B. Du Bois and Frantz Fanon, right? And if you think about your ideological progression, which you wrote as a freshman doesn't sound the same to the way that you write as a senior, right? What you write as your undergrad is not going to sound how you write as a master's student, right? What I wrote as a master's student doesn't sound the same as what I've written as a Ph.D. student, right? So it's the ideological evolution that we also must be attentive to. And when we do critiques of scholars, right, we have to kind of take that into consideration, allow them the opportunity for growth, just like you want to be afforded the opportunity for growth, right? Any other thoughts on the reading, or you guys want to jump into breakout groups? So let's do this. Let's take like a 5-minute break. Now we'll do 10. Come back at 1:27. We'll do some breakout groups, and then we'll close out with that. So I'll see you guys back at 1:27. All right, I'm gonna type the questions into the chat for our breakout groups, and then we'll go in our breakout groups, come back, discuss what we talked about in the breakout groups, and we'll call it a day. So give me a moment to bang out this chat stuff real quick. I'm also going to include the page numbers as to where the material pertains to. So the questions for our breakout groups. Why was Algeria brought into international attention in 1945? That could be found on page 74. What was the significance of Europeans using Algerians to sell radios? That could also be found on 1974. With question number 2, try to tie that to contemporary times. How does that play out in the now? So again, what is the significance of European using Algerians to sell the radios, but tie that to what's going on in today's society? How does that relate? And then the final question, what is Fanon's thesis in The Voice of Algiers? Any questions about the question? Okay. I'm gonna bring you guys out into groups, and if there are any questions, you can always use the chat or like where you can get my attention. We'll put about 5 to 6 people per breakout room. Justine, you should be in a breakout group. If you hit accept, it'll put you into the breakout group. Yeah, my fault. I fucked up. I didn't mean to do that. I'm gonna put you guys back in the group. All right, so we should get everybody back. My fault, I fucked up. I hit the wrong button. I'm gonna put you guys back into the breakout groups, and we'll still have until I'll give you till 1:45.
Okay, I was like, we had like
Yeah,
3
no, that was totally my fault. What I meant to tell y'all was to sign a spokesperson, so that way when we come back, you know who's gonna be speaking. I hit the end button, so my fault. But I'm gonna put you guys back into the groups. My fault. Yeah, Justine, we went back into the breakout groups. Yo, Justine, if you're there, you should be in your breakout group now. So that should have been enough time to kind of get that through, right? Yeah, okay, cool. So we got about, what, 15 minutes left. We'll spend the last 15 minutes just detailing what was discussed in each group, and then we'll call it a day. And then I'll just kind of recap what to expect for next week, and then that'll be it. I believe we have everybody back. So what we'll do is we'll start with group 5. I don't know who the spokesperson is for group 5, but whoever's in Golden's group, that was group 5. So I think
I'll go. For question 1, we reference it back to the 45,000 victims to the Muslim uprising. And then for question 2, significance of Europeans using Algerians to sell the radio, we came up with it was a way for Europeans to set up their national broadcasting system throughout the Arab world, Also, the sales of radios were also dependent, the nationality of the dealer, meaning as in, I have a product, but I want your people to sell it for me. And we tied it into marketing and consumerism. And how it relates today, as Sam was saying, is like the target audience of the media or the followers are selling a product for the consumer to be in the likes of who's selling the product, but not exactly like them. Meaning you are who you are, but if you do this, you now are essentially an extension of us. And the third one is the thesis. Kind of think that the media itself can be a tool for those that are oppressed, but yet it also can be a tool for the oppressors. But also, what really made stood out was a shift in thinking, and like Fanon says, of perception of the world of perception. So
yeah, good job. Dope. For group 4, it was Kenny's group. I don't know who the spokesperson is for Kenny's group, but that's the group up next.
Yeah, I guess I'm speaking for the group. We basically touched on what was previously mentioned, the horrifying massacres, and we thought that it was interesting that initially they didn't want to buy the radios at first, but since they realized it was being sold by fellow Algerians, they kind of gained that trust that since it's one from one of their own, like they're more trusting, but really it's kind of like a shady, again, marketing tactic to just implement their own radio stations. And then from there, they just use the radios that they already sold to kind of control what they put out in the radio stations. They got the French propaganda to help them out as well. And on the third question with Fanon's thesis, I kind of felt it was kind of, how to say, it's more relating to the power of the people almost, and how much influence that they use. Because although they did use the Algerians to sell their radios, and I think it was an interesting thing that the colonizers recognized the amount of power that that the people had, and they used that to their advantage. And once the Algerians realized that, they're like, hey, let's see what happened. Like, if we could use that to our advantage, like to see how much stronger we can use that for. So it's something about like the untapped potential of the power of the people, which is something that I got away from it. Yeah.
Thank you, Kenny. For group 3, it was Fionn was in the group. She may not be the spokesperson, but whoever was in Fionn's group and who is the spokesperson for that group, you're up.
Well, we're actually doing like a 2-part.
Okay.
I'll be answering the first 2, and then Ethan was going to be answering the third question.
Okay, that's cool.
So I guess everybody kind of touched on it already for like the first 2 questions. It's the massacre, the series of attacks by the French authorities that kind of brought up the whole uprising. Then when it comes to the second of the selling of the radios, it's how the previous group said, it had to do more with they're one of us. So if they're one of us, we can trust them, we can find some way to do business, but not really knowing that they're getting screwed over. So that's the way we saw it. It's almost like a two-faced thing, like you're with us, but yet you're not with us. So and on the third one, well, Ethan, if you want to step in.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for the third one, for the thesis, we kind of looked at it like Fanon was getting to, kind of demonstrate how the colonial power thinks it's all powerful, thinks it's immovable, because it has, all the weapons on its side. It has kind of the best technology, was the ones who brought the radio and all this stuff. But the piece is kind of about how the Algerians took back that power, used the radio, used that technology for their advantage, used that communication, mobilized, worked together to win back that power. Even though when this colonial power came into this land, it kind of instituted itself, it appeared immovable, it appeared insurmountable, but the people overcame it.
So, absolutely. All right. So the group number 2 was Jade was in the group. I don't know if she's the spokesperson, but whoever was in Jade's group.
Oh, it's me. Yeah, the first question, like everyone said, it was the Muslim uprising that had, 45,000 victims of it, kind of put Algeria on the spotlight. The second question, yeah, kind of what, again, everyone else was sort of talking about was like, it was more about like marketing and selling, a commodity to a people. They didn't really care to tap into that market and really find out like, why are Algerians buying radio so much? Oh, no, they just, you just need to have Algerian dealers and they'll consume the radios. I know Emilio referenced it and Pablo said it in the meeting. It's like woke capitalism, it's tokenism. And we see that today in our media, right? Where it's like, you see it, in movies, TV, you see it with political parties, you have Republicans and Democrats putting out like, oh, look at our person of color. Look, you're going to digest our message now, right? It's coming from, and you're not really going to look at like what our message really is, right? It's like very surface level. So yeah, that's exactly what they were doing then, and it's what happens today. And for the thesis, yeah, again, kind of parroting what everyone else has said, it's really about communication as a tool and how radio was that tool. And first it was it was used as a way to reinforce the voice of the oppressor, to reinforce that system. However, as the Algerians discovered, and how a lot of people discover, is like you can actually grab that tool and mold it, and it gives voice to the voiceless. They were able to really take that radio to the point where now the settlers were scared of it. They were scared of what they would hear on the radio. And we kind of see that today with the internet, right? Like at first it was sort of only the big corporations and stuff doing messages, but now through all kinds of platforms we're seeing a voice for the voiceless.
So what we'll do, just for the sake of time and the redundancy of the answers, for the last group, which is Drew's group, I don't know who the spokesperson is. Don't worry about the first question, because of course it's all going to be the same. Answer the second question more so how you related it to today, and then just tell us what you thought the thesis was. So I don't know who the spokesperson is for that group. It was Drew was in the group. So whoever was in Drew's group.
Nah, it's me. Hold on, my laptop was about to die.
All good, bro.
I plugged it in. All right, so what we came up with for question number 2, I put, we put the Europeans were successful with the Algerians being the distributor of the radios because they could cater to an audience that they weren't able to reach. And they were also reliable in finding people of all social classes in their community to deliver these radios to. And at first, that was one of it first started as a source. It first started as a source for news and foreign and Arab broadcasts, but later transitioned, obviously, we know, to Algerian national music. And this is when, the Europeans became convinced, okay, these are the people that we need to give, the radio to, because they know who to get it to. And regarding to what you said for contemporary purposes and how it relates to today in society, I would say, man, I mean, y'all know, like, that's just how it be. Like this, we know right now people that run the music business don't look like me. So, they want to give it, whether it's some local Black, Hispanic, white kid that likes rap music, they know who they got to get it to reach a mass audience, so the streets can hear it and who wants it. Because before, like you were saying about at first what hip hop was, or what any music that we get to, that the people at the top aren't the ones that are delivering it. They're giving it to people that know who to get it to ears that need to listen. So that's basically what the same thing with the radio. We know how that is with today and anything, And the third part, what is Fanna's thesis in the voice of Algeria? All right, I mean, y'all gotta give me an easy one on this, because I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna sit here and cap. I didn't read it, but just from what I
you didn't know what it was, so
no, I put something down. My group, they helped, they gave good insight, so they're just like, bro, go what you put. So I said, this is what I believe he was trying to say. Beliefs about the origins and evolution of a nation often crystallize in the forms of stories. I said radio, cinema, and media is a way for elite to try and assimilate themselves with colonized people. It's a patriarchal and Eurocentric method formed from the earliest days of society. And then I said Algerians adapted and used this medium to advance their own ways. And I didn't get to finish, but I was still going to keep.
I mean, that's it though. It's the idea of the voice, right? It's in the chapter's title, right? The voice of Algeria and how that voice shifted and evolved to become a voice of liberation. So for me, when I was thinking about question 2 and how I related today, Crystal's group kind of hit it on the head, because the first thing that popped in my mind was Kamala Harris and her Chucks and her Timbs and her black pandering shit that she's been doing. But anyway, I digress. So for next week, we're going to be watching the Battle of Algiers. I'll post the link to the YouTube link for that. But you guys mentioned another medium that you're able to get videos on. It would probably be a better copy on that other site that you guys are more familiar with. But I'll post the YouTube link so you have that as well. Yeah, that one, Canopy. So if you could find it on that, you'll probably get a better copy than what's on YouTube, but I will post the YouTube once you have that available. I'm on an optional reading. I'll also post Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, chapter 1 on violence. It's long as fuck. It's a 52-page chapter. It's optional. You don't have to read it, but it could help make contextualize the video. So that's what we'll do. I'll add that to the Google site. He said, if you cite the criterion chapter, it has it there as well. Okay, so those are 3 options. We have YouTube, Canopy, and then the Criterion channel. They all have the Battle of Algiers. So we'll have that as our main topic of conversation for next week is the film. Supplemental information will be the chapter Wretched of the Earth on violence. And then, yeah, we should have a casual conversation. It may not be the full 2 hours, just depends on how the conversation goes. We'll determine how long we stay. And then we'll get back into some reading with Glissance, and we'll kind of progress from there. Any other questions, concerns, or comments? I can't stay on the line. I have a meeting like right after this, but if there's any questions, concerns, or comments, you can either email me or just holler them out right now. All right, well, other than that, man, y'all have a good week. Be safe, be healthy, and I will see you next Friday.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.